You're listening to the Outstanding Life Podcast with your host, Johnny D, the motivational cowboy. As a motivational speaker, Johnny D impacts audiences around the world with his message of living the outstanding life. He's a best-selling author, MC, and two-time Grammy-considered artist. This podcast is a place where Johnny D can introduce you to his outstanding friends and share funny, interesting, and heart-provoking stories. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up. Here comes your host, Johnny D.
Hey everybody, I'm Johnny D, the Motivational Cowboy. Welcome to this week's Outstanding Life Podcast. On the phone today, we have Dr. Jeffrey W. Neal. He is calling in from Butler, PA, and I have my good friend Joe Downing. What is going on, gentlemen?
Not much. Glad to be with you, Johnny, and hello, Dr. Neal.
Hello. Happy Sunday to you guys.
Man, what a great day. I tell you what. Hey, listen, Dr. Jeff, we got into talking a little bit about you and who you are as an author, as an educator in the last podcast that we put out, and that was in September. I really want to dive into your book and talk about some of the chapters. And the book is titled, What a Long Strange It's Been. Jeff, in chapter 12, your dad had sent you a letter. You were teaching already. And the letter read, Dear Jeff, enclosed in this small envelope, you will find a check for $1,766. This is the amount you have paid thus far on the debt for the Monarch. I am releasing you from the $1,234 you still owe. Perhaps you could put it toward a course on your master's level degree. Love, Dad. That really touched my heart. What was that like for you to get that letter in the mail as a young teacher, a guy that just pretty much moved out to Florida, to get a letter from his dad saying, hey, listen, here's the money back that you already paid in?
I was ecstatic that I had a little money because at that time I was making like $17,000 a year my first year teaching. And I was really upset. I was like, hey, Dad, I'm moving. So one of his friends sold me this Monarch, but I didn't have $3,000. So my dad says, I'll pay for it, but you can pay me back every time you get paid. And I was like, geez, you could give me a gift for moving away, being your son, But he had a plan all along, was to send money back. And I think he got wind that I was looking at taking some graduate courses and to be a guidance counselor. So he said, well, he's probably going to need some money. So I think he planned on having me pay it all back. But and then he was encouraged me, to go ahead on and take some courses. So, yeah, I was happy to have any money back then.
So did you go back to school?
I did. I started picking away at a counseling degree, and I moved from being a teacher, which I was for 10 or 12 years, but then I moved into being a guidance counselor.
So you were teaching, coaching, and going back to school for 2 solid years to get that degree, correct?
That's about how long it took me to get that one, yeah.
What was that like?
Oh, it was busy, and at one point doing that, believe it or not, I had a part-time job in the evenings, and it was like a 65-hour work week back then.
That's pretty cool, though, that your dad really valued education, obviously. So a couple things that come to mind there, though. The Mercury Monarch. I bet you wish you still had that bad boy laying around, huh?
Hey, listen, a lot of people back then made fun of me, but absolutely you're right. It was a green 1977 Mercury Monarch, the Gia edition.
It's a step up, yeah.
Yeah, it had that little window in the back, which was really fancy.
Yeah. But it was, I'm sure, an incredible privilege to be the son of a man that valued education. And, I had a similar father, always pushing education, really valued it. And, man, what a gift in life that is, isn't it?
Yeah. And, he was from he was born in 1928. So, I was at the tail end of the baby boomers in 65. So, we came from different worlds, and but he was he was a remarkable guy. He was a principal himself,
Yeah, I had read that in your book. That's so obviously you followed in the family tradition there to a certain extent, didn't you?
Yeah, Dad would say a certain extent because he was pretty sharp.
No, Jeff, your school actually moved, right?
Yeah, we were
time?
Lakewood Junior High when I first started, and there was like 800 kids. And then because Palm Beach County was the fastest growing county in Florida at that time, a lot of new schools came up. So we drew from a whole different area, and we doubled in population. We had like 1,600 kids, 800 to 1,600.
Wow, that's crazy. And then you were teaching DOP. What can you explain to myself, Joe, and everybody listening what is teaching DOP?
Well, it was a program called Dropout Prevention. So you took kids that were at risk, and because we had so many kids, they drew them from all three grades, 6, 7, and 8, and they had 75 kids in this program, and they're all at risk, meaning they failed. Most of them were, probably came from generational poverty backgrounds, single parent households, and a lot of they're challenging kids, gangs, gothic. They were a mix of what do you want to say? Not misfits, because but they weren't really fitting into the school system, if you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely. In chapter 23, you were talking to a couple people. You had gotten your degree, and Larry asked you why you wanted to make the move from teaching to counselor. Your answer was you didn't see yourself teaching for the next 20 years, but you enjoyed helping kids with problems.
Yeah, I mean, I liked don't get me wrong on that, not seeing myself teaching. I liked my years in the classroom, but at that point, I knew I had at least 20 more years to go. And I was like, okay, I taught English for 10 years. I taught dropout prevention. I need a change. And I did like that part because, I'm honest about my, hey, I was this great teacher. I was a good teacher. I was an effective teacher, and I got along with the kids. I created relationships with them. But there were some master teachers I worked with that really, were artists. But my strength was creating relationships with the kids. And if you create a relationship with a kid, you get through that barrier, then you can help them.
Yeah, that's really cool. Let me run this by you, and you just tell me if this had any part in your change from teacher to counselor. And, I was just doing a little bit of research in the way teachers are graded. It's about test scores quite often. That's like, the big indicator. Yeah, well, I'm afraid I might. I was just looking at, test scores in the school that you taught in, and obviously they're a struggle. But then I looked at the demographics of that area. And just a lot of challenges there, I'm sure, to teach these kids. I mean, they're, majority are non-white kids. The socioeconomic status is very low, like you were mentioning, lots of gang involvement. And then you're expected to have these test scores that are on par with other much more privileged areas. And I just imagine that can get very frustrating. And it's a frustration I feel. I work in healthcare, and we're judged on, for one thing, like readmission rates for our patients. But so much of it's out of our control. We can't help these people to the extent that they can be prevented from getting readmitted. So we're graded poorly on it, but it's just like, man, it just seems so unfair. And I can't help but think that is part of the deal of being a teacher. It's like, man, I there's so many things that are out of your control in terms of improving their test scores.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. It's probably one of the most frustrating things that I dealt with and my colleagues, because, especially kids like ours, the majority never went on a vacation. Not a lot of books in the household. Their parents weren't taking them to the library. I use that term generational poverty, which basically means your family's been on the poverty level for several generations.
Right.
And when you have that, and then you're with, a upper middle class kid that's gone on vacations and been sent to camps, and every time they have a problem, a tutor's hired, and they're being tested to be gifted. Of course, they're going to do better on a test, but that doesn't mean these kids. A lot of those kids that didn't score well were super bright kids.
Right. Right.
A lot of forms of intelligences that the tests don't measure, and the grade in the schools was, to me, that whole grade in the schools hijacked education. It became all about the test scores and not so much about the kid anymore.
Right. And now, did you feel that you were able to get away from that a little bit once you became a counselor, or was the grading for a counselor a similar type metric?
No, you know what? How do you evaluate? You don't get a test score when you're a counselor. You just sort of know, if your kids are wanting to come talk to you, and if they're coming to you with problems, like one kid, it's like word of mouth, like, hey, we had a counselor named Frank Mascara,
mm-hmm.
and he was a great counselor, and like the teachers get to meet, they all want to go see Mr. Mascara. I go, that's because he's helping them out. He's not having a party in his office.
Yeah.
Well, the kids, there's an example. Oh, I know his mother just died, but if he doesn't attend this class, we have a test coming up. Yeah, well, let him go talk to Frank for an hour and miss your precious class. I know your grade is depending on it and how you're evaluated, but this kid just lost his mom,
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff, you also, attendance was a huge problem at that school, and you started a program called the Breakfast Club. What was that like, and how did you come up with the idea?
Yeah, well, actually, the gentleman I just mentioned, Frank Mascara, that was his thought process to, one thing I did learn, the way to a man is through his stomach, they say. The way to a kid is, I started giving my dropout prevention kids an opportunity to have pizza and a movie on Friday, and they, would jump through hoops to eat that pizza and watch a movie instead of, having to crack a book open. But truancy is a big problem everywhere, especially right now after the pandemic. A lot of kids aren't going to school anymore, but we got this thing where on Fridays they could come in, eat, real healthy stuff like Dunkin' Donuts and muffins, and have a little juice. But they were like, hey, if you come to school all week, you have a little breakfast. You can miss a little bit of first period and have a little breakfast with your friends. And for whatever reason, it worked. They were starting to attend school just for that donut.
Jeff, in chapter 27, it talks about you working with emotionally handicapped kids and gangbangers. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, okay. EEH is what we call the emotionally handicapped kids. There's a different name for them now, different acronyms. I think it's EBD, emotional behavior disorder. But, those kids have a medical reason that they act a certain way. Like their brain chemistry is different, not just hyper, but, some of them can't control their anger. That was real challenging stuff. I don't know if we have time to talk about Rodney, but
I was just going to ask you, tell me and everybody else the story about Rodney.
Yeah, that was a beautiful thing. Rodney was like, 300 pounds and tall. He played rec league football, but he was SEH severely. And one day he decided to take off all his clothes and run through the front of the school at dismissal while all the parents are lined up in their cars. And, his teacher was a big guy. He played football at UCF. So you see these two big guys running. And I was coming out of the building. I'll never forget it. There's naked Rodney. Hauling, as I put in the book, hauling, literally. And he was running through the front of the school. We got him dressed. And God bless him, he had a little bit of a speech impediment. But while I was calling his mother after we got him dressed again, to, let him let her know he was going to be suspended for a couple of days. He goes, I can help you grow your hair back. And, I started losing my hair in my 30s. So at that time, I was almost shaving my head like, number one all over. And I look at him, and he's looking real serious. So I hung up the phone. I said, how are you going to help me grow my hair back? He goes, regrow? I go, regrow? He goes, yeah, my stepdad gets it at the beauty salon. You just tap it on your head and help you grow your hair back. And I was like, oh, my God. Sorry, Rodney, you're still suspended.
Well, this was your first time dealing with, gangs as well, right?
Yeah. When I first was there, I mean, they might have been present in the mid 80s, but something happened in the 90s where, it also helped that our school population doubled. But you started to see different gangs, and it was a new phenomenon for me. And because I was a counselor, my principal kind of tried to get me to do interventions and so forth with them, and I learned a lot about gangs.
That's a hard battle, isn't it? Interventions, because like you had written in your book, that's their family. Right, and man, there really is that pull to be part of something bigger, yeah. and if they don't have that at home, it's a pretty easy transition to join a gang, isn't it?
Yeah. I actually had a gang leader educate me about that. He said, I'll never forget. He goes, "Do you know why they're in the gang?" And I go, "Well, I guess I hear protection." He goes, "No, two most powerful forces in the universe is love and family." And I was like, and it didn't even dawn on me that was a family situation,
Yeah. No, you wouldn't think of that.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are, from broken homes. So maybe they didn't have a good sense of family. And so now they have this acceptance and protection, and plus, like an old country song, "Ladies love outlaws." The girls. I used to say, like, "Oh my God, you're going to have to come visit him in prison. Is this a guy you want to be hooked up with?" But
and speaking of that, Jeff, in chapter 27, you talk about something that you guys started, and it was called Bicycle Academy and Barbecues.
Yeah, that was James Quillian, James Smith, and Maximo Michelle. They were working with the EH kids, and what they did, it was ingenious. They got them to work on bicycles, learning how to fix them up. So that people started donating bicycles from the community. The kids would fix them up. And, Q is what we called James Quillian, the teacher. Q would go out and buy all the tools, anything they needed to fix the bikes up. And these kids were learning how to work on bikes. So the first bike they got to keep for themselves. And then they started fixing up these bikes and then donating them to needy kids in the school population. So we'd pull a kid out of class that's going to be getting a book. The teachers would tell us, like, this kid really needs some help, And you should have seen these kids that, tough, can't help themselves, sitting down, emotionally handicapped, brains are wired differently than ours, pushing a bike out to a kid, and that their look on their face, like, look, I'm helping this kid. It was like and it created a relationship. They started liking the teachers more, and the school police officer, Debbie was her name, Officer Debbie. The kids started liking, which is a huge thing to get these kids to like a police person, the popo. And
well, isn't that amazing, guys? Jeff, just to interrupt just for a second. All I can think about was these two rooms filled with all kinds of tools. I mean, tools that can hurt you and hurt one another.
Yeah, the first time I walked in there, my eyes were darting around. I'm like, okay, Rodney could pick that up and bash my head in. And he could get, a slap on the wrist. Like, okay, that was a manifestation of your handicap. Don't worry about it, Rodney.
And there was never a problem, was there?
No, but you know what? That was because that relationship was
Yeah,
created.
yeah.
You're going to hear me say that, but that's the biggest part of education. If you create relationship with kids, it's 90% of the battle.
I just got goosebumps just thinking about that. I mean, just you have these tough kids working on bikes and giving them away and having that satisfaction. I think that's something that we're all looking for. You know, another thing I want you to talk about is you guys had a local restaurant called The Farmer Girl, and it was owned. It was owned by Pete. Just want to take a couple minutes and talk about how important that restaurant was to your school community, and then the community itself.
Well, Pete, and I'm ashamed I don't know his last name, but he was an older Greek guy, and he started this restaurant. It's been there. If you ever go to Lake Worth Beach, it's really good breakfast. Farmer Girl. But he had this thing where he'd invite the homeless in at Thanksgiving, and his diner would be filled, 100 people homeless, and they're eating turkey and stuffing and potatoes. So I just told him one day, I said, that is so cool that you do that. And he knew I worked at the middle school, and he says, hey, if you ever, the police come and get to go dinners, if you ever want to do that for your families, just let me know. I go, well, how many would you like? He goes, I don't care, 20, 30. So, we aimed high, and the guidance department took it on. And so the 3 guidance counselors would go, we'd pick up these styrofoam and take them to different families. And again, the teachers would be networking with us and saying, yeah, this family's, they're really, the lights are off now. And, that was, but this guy did it all pro bono. I'm sure whoever he was in the restaurant business, they probably said, okay, we're going to cut you a deal on the turkeys or whatever. But he did that for years. I think he just stopped it because he retired and his family still has the business. I know they still do. I don't know if they do as much as they used to, just because Pete's probably in his 80s now. But it was an amazing thing and really nice for the kids.
Jeff, that's also a place that you went and met an officer that educated you about gang activity in that area. Talk a little bit about that meeting that day. And I have to ask you, after that meeting, were you a little nervous or scared to be involved with what you were getting yourself involved with at school?
Yeah, for sure. I was, leery of, when my principal said, I'd like you to work with the gang kids. I'm like, oh, great. That's good news. But, he was the head of the gang task force, and the principal, Sharon Walker, asked me to meet him, and he just ran down, like, this guy knew everything about gangs. So a lot of the stuff, how they graffiti, they tag walls and bathrooms and stuff. I saw the graffiti, but didn't really know what it meant. So then he was giving me the other pieces of the puzzle, like, Sir 13 didn't mean anything, or Bloods and Crips and MS 13, whatever, all the different ones. And he ran down where they came from, their history, and the violence. And the part that was scary was they're sort of at war. It's like the NFL of crime,
Yeah, man. You didn't see that in Butler, Pennsylvania, did you?
No, the closest, maybe you saw a biker gang ride down the road on a Sunday or something, with some leather. Not like this. This was something different.
Right.
Tattoo, 14-year-olds with tattoos, and they look like they're 40 years old when they're 13 or 14.
Right. I was looking up the demographics of Butler, I guess Hampton Township. I think that's where your father was a principal, right, in Hampton?
That's where he and my mom were there.
Right. So I was looking up, you came from a town, or at least an area that was almost all white, I suspect. That's kind of what it looks like. And then you moved to Lake Worth, Florida, where really diverse population. That must have been pretty enlightening, I suspect. Yeah. Not just because of the gangs, but, just all sorts of different cultures down there, I'm envisioning.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know the difference between a Dominican and a Puerto Rican and a Cuban. And there was Latin people. I knew that from geography at Old Knock High School. But, once I got in there and it was interesting for me too, you got a little taste of the world around us and learning, Black culture and Haitian, it's whole different, Jamaican, everything,
Yeah. Quite a melting pot down there.
Hey,
exactly.
Jeff, in chapter 28, you were coaching basketball. I got to ask you, man, how many, with a school that big, how many kids would actually try out and how many kids would actually make the team?
Well, 300 or 400 could try out, out of 3 grade levels. And then you had to whittle it down to 15. Wow. And it was that was a hard part, because at that age, everybody thinks, they're going to go to the NBA or I used every time as a counselor, what do you see yourself doing? I'm going to the NFL. I was like, yeah, well, I was going to the NBA and I'm sitting here talking to you.
Did you coach alone or did you have a team of coaches?
No, I had Barry Gruno was my assistant coach, and the fellow I mentioned earlier, Frank Mascara, he used to pop his head in the gym and help a little bit. But Barry was officially my assistant coach.
Hey, with you coaching all those years, did you guys ever win a championship?
Well, I'm not going to tell you that, Johnny. That would be a spoiler for anybody that does me a favor and buys this book.
Right. That's funny.
So then if you're not going to tell everybody if you guys won a championship or not, I want you to talk about Ant-Man and Sammy Lee.
Oh God, yeah. Well, it's like you guys probably experienced this in life. Some of the best things that happened to you weren't really planned. And somebody said to me, you need to get Ant-Man on your team. And I'm like, I got 300 kids trying out right now. I don't need another kid trying out. And so just then this kid walks by and he was tall. He was athletic looking. And he goes, that's Ant-Man there. I said, okay. So I said to him, hey, why don't you come to tryouts? And he was real shy and didn't hardly talk back then. And sure enough, he was a natural. He ended up getting a scholarship to Georgia Southern, and he runs works for the department, City of Lake Worth Beach, runs the department recreation over at the gym where he grew up.
Wow, that's cool. That's a great story.
Yeah. And Sammy Lee, this kid played professional ball, and another thing, he came out and he was mad at a teacher. He kicked the door open and it hit my shoulder, and I was mad at him. We had a little confrontation in the hall, and then I watched him walk away. And he had shorts on, and he had these calves with these big veins running up his calves. And I started looking. I go, he's tall. Sorry about that little adjective there. And I said, he's tall. And all of a sudden he came to basketball, and I asked him if he could touch the rim. He jumped up and grabbed it with 2 hands and hung on it. And I was like, oh my God.
This is like a 7th or 8th grader, right?
Yeah. He was a 7th grader that year.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
And then, so you coached basketball with Barry. You taught with him, but you also played some rec ball with Barry and his brother, didn't you?
Yeah, he was a really good player, and he and his brother had a team, and we were both in our mid-30s back then, and we were called the Beatniks, and we played over in the gym in the hood, as they say, and that's where I got to know him, and he had already created relationships with that community. I had one through coaching, but he had one because he was always over there playing basketball.
What was Barry like?
Geez. You always hear this, he's one of the nicest guys I ever met, but he really was one of the nicest guys I ever met. His friends that I got to know, he grew up in Florida, in Jupiter, Florida. And his friends that grew up with him told me they used to call him the Gandhi of Lake Worth Beach.
Wow, that's cool. Hey, Jeff, in chapter 29, The title is Lessons from Angel, and I couldn't wait to talk about this chapter. And Joe, I don't know if you got through the chapter without crying or getting a little bit emotional. I want you to talk about in the beginning of that chapter. You talk about two students fighting, and one of them was named Martin, and you were asked to take him home from school. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sometimes if you have parental permission, especially if they were going to fight, because even if you separate them, that doesn't mean they're not going to try to fight. If they're mad, you have to keep kids separated. So I took this kid home. He was gang affiliated, and his uncle, and this was when I just found out I was supposed to do these interventions, and he's the one we talked about earlier that sort of gave me a lesson in what the gangs were about, and kind of even gave me direction on how to deal with it, because the approach I was taking to try to talk the kids out of being in a gang, both the policeman that we talked about at the Farmer Girl and Angel was his name, both advised me like, don't waste your time trying to convince a kid that he should leave his family. There's other things you could do to help him.
Well, during, you took the kid home, you met his Uncle Angel. Uncle Angel asked you to come back for dinner. You did. But that day at dinner, you talk about, how much pride they had in having you come over and cooking and stuff like that. But during dinner, they asked you if you wanted some hot sauce for your burrito. I want you to touch on the story about the hot sauce.
Yeah, that Martin was, of course, at the dinner table, and his mother made this great, different Mexican dishes and burritos I was going to town on. And the Angel says, "You want some hot sauce?" He was handing me some Chipotle, whatever it was. And he goes, "We have some other hot sauce in the fridge." And Martin says, "It's too hot for gringos." And, that's what they call we white people, right? So I was like, "Oh, really?" So, as I put in the book, my male ego got involved. Like, "Oh, I can try your hot sauce." And I think he said ghost pepper. I don't remember. Whatever it was one of the hottest things that ever went near me. And my eyes were crying, and I was, my throat almost felt like it was shutting. And back then was when I was first starting to lose my hair. So, I had that little crown circle on top of my head. And however that hot sauce reacted in my body, and they were all looking at me because I was like, and, for me, however my body is, like the sweat will form in a little bit on where it was bald up there, right? Well, I didn't realize that I had sweated so much that it was like a puddle was on my head. So I went to feel like, just tap my head to see how wet it was up there. And then when I hit it, like water, and when like a sprinkler came out, and I was like, "Oh my God!" And ate some bread and some cake. They had Tres Leches cake, and it sort of cooled the fire. But yeah, that was hot.
And Jeff,
that was. Yeah.
No, so after dinner, you and Angel kind of go in the backyard, have a beer and a cigar, and Angel was an open book, and he said, "What do you want to know? What questions? Go ahead and talk to me." What was that like for you to open up with Angel that evening in the backyard at a perfectly, it was a stranger's house.
Yeah. I was a little, and there was a little party going on next door, and I that was, it was like a little gang neighborhood there. And,
well, yeah, because you rolled up and there was lowriders and everything else next door.
Oh yeah. One guy, scared the bejesus out of me. He, did that, hydraulics thing. The car starts bouncing when I was walking by. I was like, "Oh," but, it was, that, and he was really trying to help me in a sense where I think he would be able to, give me some kind of, idea what it's like to be in a gang.
So speaking of that, he also showed you, right? Because you left his backyard and went next door to that party, correct?
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead and tell all the listeners what happened when you guys walked next door?
Okay. Yeah, I said something like, "Is this protection thing really that necessary?" And he, being a teacher that he was that night, he thought like, "How can I show this gringo what this is like?" So he took me over to the party next door, and there was 40, 50 people there, and he was like a general, and he said something. All the females went into the household. And then a lot of other males left. There was a fence between the two houses. A lot of the other males, and I think there was like 13 guys standing there around the fire. And basically they, had tattoos, tough looking guys wearing jewelry. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, these guys are going to beat me up and, pummel me here around this fire. And they weren't smiling, and they were closing in a little bit. I dropped my cigar, and I was like, okay, here we go. And all of a sudden they started laughing and were hugging me. And he goes, later on, he says, "How you felt is how one of the kids will feel if another gang comes up on them in the streets."
That was a very powerful scene, man. That was,
and I was, I got it. I said, "Yeah, I'd like to have a gang behind me if I had to walk these streets."
Yeah, I mean, you said in the book, sometimes a teacher needs a teacher, and Angel was your teacher that day.
Absolutely.
Jeff, in chapter 35, this is where the all the fun and games kind of stop, and all these funny stories, because it got real for you and the community at your school. Your friend Barry, your coworker, your coach, got shot in the classroom.
Yeah, you couldn't have put it better. All the fun and games stopped that day. It was the last day of school. He was killed with 5 minutes left in the school day, and that was a tough one. Shot by one of his students, and it was the last. All my colleagues said he would be the last teacher we would think that would get shot. He was like, kids were clamoring to get in his classroom.
Does anybody know to this day what and why it happened and why it was Barry? Such an incredible teacher, such an incredible father, such an incredible husband.
Yeah. My theory, which I touch on a little bit in the book, was one of the guidance counselors at that time sent him home for throwing water balloons. Suspended, he got suspended, and sometimes that was just how you did things. Okay, these kids sent home. Well, whatever transpired between the counselor and the student, he wanted to come back and I believe kill the guidance counselor that sent him home. And he told somebody, "You're going to see me all over the news." But he wanted to go talk to two girls that were in Barry's classroom. And, during that moment, Barry wouldn't let him in. He says, "You're suspended. You're not supposed to be here." So he pulled the gun out thinking the girls would go out. And this particular gun was like a Saturday night special, had a reputation for, I think it's called a hair trigger, where it can go off easily.
Yep.
And I do not believe he meant to kill Barry, but he shot him and killed him right there.
Did this shooting at your school, did it make national news?
Yeah, it was. There was a shooting in Paducah, Kentucky, and then Columbine, which everybody remembers. That was the one that got school shootings on the map.
Yep.
And we were about a year after that. And I remember distinctly that night when I was going to bed, I had the news on, and Tom Brokaw said, "It's happened again, another school shooting." And it was on court TV, it was and back then that was a big thing. You guys might not remember, but this kid in Miami that was given life for murder. He murdered a girl, but he was like 14. And, a lot of people were, trying to say, hey, these kids still could be saved, and should we just throw them away? And so, there was protests at the trial, which I write about in the book. And, a lot of emotions were running real high. The people that lost, the family, and actually the whole community was rocked.
Yeah, that's a tough scene, because the kid was, what, 13 years old? 13
or 14, yeah.
Yeah, and I just went and read on the internet what I could about the story, and so he's still away. Man, yeah, it's tough, right? I mean, because if you're the family members of the victim, you probably want some justice, and if you're
there was people that thought he should have gotten life, and there's other people thought he should have been cut some slack, and it was the whole trial. There's like 14 kids had to testify, and Frank Mascara and I were kind of in charge of helping them through that. So seeing those kids having to go up and know they're going to be on national TV, they have to sit in front of their friend that's on trial. It was a heady time.
And you had to talk during the press conference as well too. What was that like for you to be right there with all the cameras and everything else, and talk about one of your best friends being shot?
Yeah, that was a surreal moment. The principal was asked by the district to make the statement, and she knew that he and I coached together, and she asked if I would do it, and I was like, oh God. And but that kind of motivated me to do some of the things I did later, because I just felt like I blew it. I got up there, and they asked me a question. I kind of went, I was still in shock, and I remember I was staring, and I felt like, man, I had this opportunity to, and I tried to, I said what a good guy he was, how much he loved Lake Worth Beach, family man, the kids loved him. But, how you're your own worst critic. I remember when I was done talking, I was like, geez, I could have done that better. And that kind of motivated me to want to do some things, to kind of make up for that.
So how did you guys deal with all the trauma at school?
We had counselors there for a while, and, professional counselors came in for staff and students and anybody that wanted it. But after they leave, they stay for a week or two, you're kind of on your own. And there's a lot of research now, and unfortunately there's so many school shootings. But back then it was still kind of a new phenomenon, and we were at ground zero, and things just happened, like kids doing posters and writing letters either to Barry or to Barry's family. All those things seem to help, especially the kids. That they call it art therapy. And the teachers did different things, and that's one part of, maybe it'll be interesting to people to read the book, because I documented the stuff that worked for us.
Yeah, you guys also had like golf tournaments. You had like team dedications.
That was a huge part. A fella from Pittsburgh area, Dave Palumbo, he owns a restaurant, Dave's Last Resort, and he had just opened a restaurant shortly before the incident. And I'd known him because we're from the same area up here. And he says, hey, I'm going to do a golf tournament to benefit the family. And it was unbelievable. People donated things, like they auctioned off Muhammad Ali's boxing shorts, and and that first tournament, the money was donated to Barry's family, and but that helped the community. You asked me what helped. It sort of galvanized us when we felt like, okay, somehow we're doing something to remember Barry, and also to help a family, and eventually a scholarship fund came out, which is part of whatever I make on the books, portions of it are going to go towards a scholarship fund. There's a scholarship fund in his name for kids that are seniors in Palm Beach County that want to go into teaching.
Man, that's awesome.
It is. That's
Jeff,
really
just
cool.
real quick, were you and the teachers after this, situation, were you guys scared to go back to school?
Actually, a lot were. I think 20 teachers either retired or moved.
Wow.
That year, 20 or 25.
Out of how many? Is that like a pretty significant?
Back then, we probably had 70 teachers.
Oh man, that's huge turnover.
70,
Okay. Yeah.
75, 80 at the most.
Wow.
There was that the term for that sanctuary trauma, because it's a place that should be safe to you all of a sudden doesn't feel safe.
Right.
And I didn't. I don't know if it's because I really thought that was a fluke as far as the kid going home and shooting a teacher, but once the I don't know, you won't believe it being that there's so many school shootings, but a school was still the safest place for a kid to be.
Yeah, no, I believe it. I've read the statistics. It's it's hard to believe because you hear so much about it, right?
Right. But there's more kids are shot away from school than they are at school.
Right. And Jeff, how can people find your book?
Well, there's a few ways. The publisher was named Dorrance, Dorrance, and you can order it through their library, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can get it through them. You just have to Google the title and my name, and it'll come up, and that's how they could get it.
Yes, a great book. I really enjoyed it, and I'd recommend it to all of your listeners, Johnny. And I was reading this quote this morning that made me think of your book, Jeff, and it says, "Always read something that will make you look good if you die in the middle of it." And I'm really glad
wow.
I didn't die this past week, but if I had, I would have looked good because it was on my nightstand.
You know what? You've asked some great questions. I'm glad you didn't die this week.
Thanks.
Hey, in chapter 43, we started the podcast out talking about your dad, and I want to end the podcast talking about your dad. In chapter 43, your dad passes. Is that kind of how you started your doctorate? Is because of your dad's passing? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad was 80 when he passed, and his best friend eulogized him. His name was Walt Durkast. Now, my dad, Wayne Neal, and Walt Durkast, they met each other as young men. They were both principals in Westchester, Pennsylvania, around that area outside of Philadelphia. And they realized that my mom worked for Walt and Walt's wife, Virginia, worked for my dad. So they decided, hey, this is maybe meant to be. And then they found out that both of them were born May 3rd, 1928. And I was like, something about not against anybody that's born May 3rd, but those two were Tars the Bulls and stubborn and, tough guys, both real different generations. But when the guy eulogized my dad, and at the wake later, Walt says, the last thing your dad said to me is he thought you should go back and get a doctorate. And I was like, oh, geez.
No pressure there.
And you were 50 years old at this point, right?
I was, I just turned 50. And, it kind of pricked my conscience, and my mom, I wouldn't have done it financially. I couldn't afford it, but my mom and dad, when they retired, they both took each other's retirement, and one dies, they get two retirements. And, my mom says, I'll be willing to help you with your tuition. And I was like, oh my God, now, it's like an offer you really can't refuse. And, because, there's a cartel in the United States, and people are, the college the prices going to college today is astronomical. One of the nice things about the Barry Bruno scholarship is, a lot of these kids wouldn't be able to afford college if they don't get help.
Right.
And, here's a scholarship that is in memory. I would think Barry would be so happy that, something came out of his death where kids are becoming teachers,
Yeah.
And, but anyways, Johnny, back to what, that's where I started, and I had to pick a topic. A lot of my people in my doctoral cohort were studying reading programs or this. And so I did a case study on how we recovered as a school community, what worked for us recovering. And I asked the teachers and the school policemen and the guidance counselors and administrators, some of the people at the district, the chief of the school police, different things that they thought helped them or helped our school community. And, that was how I ended up, becoming Dr. Jeff Neal instead of, Mr. Jeff Neal.
That's incredible. And the book is called What a Long Strange It's Been. And we've been talking with Dr. Jeffrey W. Neal, my good friend Joe Downing. And guys, I can't thank you enough for it's never enough time when we're talking on these podcasts, but I can't thank you guys enough for spending some time. And Jeff, just any last words?
Well, I want to just thank you because I'm not an expert in social media, which is how I'd have to promote my book. I really appreciate you giving me a chance to share it with people. And if anybody would go back to the last podcast to listen, I read something to you. I don't know if you remember at the end. I just happened to be reading a devotional or something that last time we talked, and it was talking about, don't forget the light you're given. And, by you helping people live an outstanding life, you're doing some things that, not many people get to do, and you have that opportunity. So if they can go back and listen to what I read last time, if they listen to your podcast on a regular basis, I think it's worth going over again. So.
And when they buy your book, they'll know if you won a championship or not.
That's right.
Yes, they will. They'll find out that and a couple of other things.
Yeah. Well, the book is incredible. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Outstanding Life podcast. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Motivational Cowboy. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Outstanding Life podcast. Follow Johnny D on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Motivational Cowboy. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, advertise, or would like to make a donation, please visit motivationalcowboy.com. And remember to have an outstanding day.
Hey, I'm Johnny D, the Motivational Cowboy. Are you planning a conference, convention, meeting, assembly, or any live event that needs a guest speaker? I would love to be a part of it. For more information, visit motivationalcowboy.com. And don't forget to check out my Outstanding Life podcast every Sunday here on Dirt Road Radio, KYDT 103.1 FM and KBFS 1450 AM. Have an outstanding day.